Okay, so I'm from Powerhouse Ventures and we're a seed stage investment company. And my background, as Bill said, started with Japanese and various things, but I was also a founding employee and co-inventor in a corporate spin-out in Christchurch. And so have learnt about intellectual property from hard experience on the ground, both as a developer and then, as it turned out, seller of IP, because we couldn't get venture capital back then in New Zealand to take our IP from lab scale through to scale up. And so we ended up selling the IP to a big multinational in Europe. And so then for the last 4 years I've been working for Powerhouse Ventures on the buying side of intellectual property. And so that's the background that I bring to this. So I wanted to approach looking at making IP easy from the perspective of what would make it easy for the buyers of intellectual property. So I want to have a look at what some of the commercialisation options are for university and research IP, and then look a bit at the IP rights toolbox. So many people are familiar with patents, trademarks, copyright. There are an awful lot more tools that can go into that toolbox from which you can build an IP strategy. So I want to have a wee bit of a look at that, and then there are some specific research institute issues in commercialising research from universities to do with publication, the need to encourage and to leverage off publication as opposed to secrecy, and the timing factors of those things and the budgets of early stage IP. So have a look at those, and then I want to go into what the IP rights negotiation process is actually about on buying intellectual property. So regardless of how it's commercialised, there's a seller and a buyer, and in order for both parties to be comfortable they've reached a good negotiation point on that, they both have to have a clear understanding and have their own view on the value of that intellectual property and how it can best be commercialised. And I want to do that in the context of a case study. Invert Robotics Ltd was our first spin-out together with the University of Canterbury back in April last year. And so just want to run through that that negotiation process and the valuing of IP from that case study. And then just finally to finish with just a few tips that would help strengthen research-based intellectual property for those who are coming in to buy it. Regardless of which vehicle is used to commercialise intellectual property, when you end up at the end of a research outcome, there are IP rights associated with it. It's the copyright in the thesis or in the publication, or it can be something inventive that could be patented. And so regardless of which path you go through, that capturing documentation and understanding of intellectual property rights is really important for commercialisation. So it could be that that intellectual property is licensed directly into industry. Say you have a new coating on a seed that makes it grow faster. Licensing that straight into, or selling it straight into a seed company might be the best transfer route for that piece of IP. Or it could be into a holding company if it's a platform piece, such as Bob talked about with a whole transformer platform. You may put it into a holding company. You may have a new compound that could go into a pharmaceutical. It could also go into a beverage and perhaps even into an industrial coating for another application. And so there might be different ways to leverage that platform that are best served by different commercialisation vehicles. And then the one that we mostly do at Powerhouse, which is either we buy, it's either licensed into or sold into a startup company. Or alternatively, it may be that it's most suited to just publication and carrying on as a research only. So the tools that are in this toolbox to choose from when developing an intellectual property strategy, and the intellectual property strategy is there to support whatever business strategy and whatever business model you've got. So obviously most people are aware of the ones on the left-hand side, and they're governed under the TRIPS agreement mostly. Any country that wants to be a member of the World Trade Organisation has to sign up to the trade-related aspects of intellectual property agreement, and that sets out some minimum standards and minimum provisions that you must provide for in your national laws, and they include that you must provide members of other WTO states the same rights as you give your own nationals in your country. Of course, then people put in bilateral, trilateral, multilateral agreements to try and leverage around those things as well, but that's the general intent of that international harmonisation policy. And so we've got copyright, which protects your expression of interest. We've got trademarks, obviously your branding and recognition of source, and a whole heap of rights down there. We also have a whole heap of other rights on the other side, which are your things like domain registrations for websites, unregistered brands, so trademarks with the "we are" and the circle around them, that's a registered trademark. You fight off your competitors through the trademark provisions in Acts. whereas you can also have unregistered trademarks, but if you want to defend those, you have to take them through the court system for passing off or unfair competition kind of laws. So different rights have to be dealt with under different legal provisions. You can have endorsements, such as the All Blacks endorsing a product. That adds a lot of intellectual value to a product. Standards, franchises, license agreements, preferred supplier agreements, and regulatory approvals. So these are all tools that are in the toolbox to choose from. And the ones I've put in bold there are the ones we usually deal with on research coming out of universities and research institutes. And just as an illustration to see how that can be applied, I guess intellectual property rights can give you two things. They can give you exclusivity, where you can keep others out of the market for a certain period of time, and they can also give you brand recognition, reputation, trust in your brand. And you can see there, you can things like patents in the tear top design, registered the shape, ornamental shape of the design of the can. You've got your trademarks and copyright in any of your marketing materials. But you've also got a trade secret in your formula, supplier contracts, preferred supplier contract status, license agreements, website domains, and franchise bottling. So there are a lot of rights tied up, even just in a bottle of water and a can of Coke. So how do you choose which of those tools to help you with your competitive advantage in the market? And key things that it comes down to, this is not an exhaustive list, but the ones in bold there, again, are things we find that are very pertinent to research coming out of universities and research institutes, and that's your emerging business model. Now, at the stage of research coming out of university, the business model may change 2 or 3 times, and so you have to have an enduring enough IP strategy to be able to support that right through. Disclosure history is a big one. With patents, typically, there are a few bendy rules, but typically if it's been disclosed, you can't patent it. So if you've published and then decide it's got commercial potential, you've got a problem there. And so that's a big issue for us, the ownership and the disclosure ahead of patenting before disclosure. And another big one is freedom to operate analysis. And anyone who's done a research application will know that that's a section that you have to address in your applications. So with freedom to operate, we're not just looking at patents. Is there anyone with a patent who can constrain your ability to get into a market? Patents are jurisdiction driven, so it could be that you're only restrained from the US market or from a whole range of markets. So you need to understand how much at risk you are from being constrained by other people. But there's also contract freedom to operate. Often research agreements, the research has happened over a lot of years, a lot of periods, a lot of different companies may have been involved in different aspects. People could have rights, a first right to commercialise or some sort of right to be involved with the IP, and that's important to understand. And then there's also regulatory freedom to operate. Time to market and budget, obviously also really big ones, very tight budgets. How do you choose which one to patent? Once you start patenting, anywhere between $20,000 and $100,000 before you may actually get the product to market. How do you make those decisions? And it's pretty difficult. And then on top of that, we have research-specific factors. And that comes down to the policies of the research institute or university, how commercially driven they are, what their intellectual property ownership and benefits back to the inventors' policies are, how much trust the researchers and academics have in the tech transfer system. Do they see it as something that holds up their career path by the thought that it's going to prevent publication or delay publication? Or is there a good innovative culture within the university and a way to quickly deal with those things and make that decision on patent before publish or just publish? It's not about stopping publication, it's about finding the best way to leverage that and whether it should be protected first. Say disclosure history. Students, you might have 10, 20 students and they're all working on various things over a 10-year period, and you know, one who did the last PhD is now working for the competition or the potential competition or one player in the market. How do you cope with that, the fact that that know-how has gone with that person? And leakage. Obviously, if people don't recognise the commercial potential, and you get to a conference and you're talking about things, it's understanding where that leakage is, so getting in early enough to protect before the commercial aspects are disclosed. Time to market, as I said, big issue because it takes so long. Once you've published or once a patent has been put in place, the clock is ticking, both on budgets and on publication, so that the competition has time to catch up before you may have a chance to commercialise. And so what that leads to is you have to have business models and the supporting IP strategies which leverage off publication and collaboration. So you want to make the most of opportunities to publish, to get reputation built, to get industry contacts. So they're the challenges that we see faced. So then you have a piece of IP and you need to sell it. Or in our case, we want to buy it. And in order to buy that IP, we have to understand and we have to have a position going into negotiation, as does the other side. And the way we go about it at Powerhouse, we score some of these factors from a 1 to 10. And the key things that are really important are things like the ownership of the IP. 1 for if it's pretty murky, or to a 10 where it's nice and clean. Everyone in the university who's worked on that has assigned their IP to the university, and it's very clear. So it's always somewhere along that spectrum. We have things, disclosure, has it been disclosed before it's been protected or not? IP strength, is it an improvement level? Is it improving on that platform that makes you able to do a job better, or is it a real platform technology, a new compound that can go into a lot of different applications and markets? The landscape, is the technology landscape and the competitive landscape crowded, or is it clear? It'll be somewhere along that spectrum. Are there a lot of people operating in there? Are there a lot of litigious big companies operating in there? Or is there a nice little bit of white space that you've identified for yourself? And then we look at the intellectual property rights as far as freedom to operate goes. Is it constrained? Are there lots of people competing? Does it look like you may have to license some IP in before you can commercialise your own IP? Or is it looking significantly clear? Often significantly clear is when these key patents are coming off, and so that everything else has built on that as improvements, and there's a space there that makes it easy. And the other thing is, as I said, IP rights are typically jurisdiction based. So you may not be able to go into the US market for 10 years, but hey, your key markets are in Asia, and that's clear space. So it's understanding the landscape that you're in. And we have contractual to talk about, and regulatory. So we have to go and analyse each piece of IP to see where it fits along that scale before we can enter into the negotiation. So you're looking at whether you're going to buy the IP or whether it's going to be a licence, and there are different kinds of licence. They can be limited to a jurisdiction or to a particular field of use. And it can be that it's non-exclusive, that you're going to license to a whole heap of different companies, or it can be exclusive, only you are able to use that and take it to market. And once we have negotiated on that, then we're looking at the intellectual property strategy. What's the emerging business model, and what's the best way to add competitive advantage to that model? We're looking at time to market, exclusivity and reputation building options, freedom to operate. Is there any additional IP required in order to be able to go to market? Competitor landscape, technology hurdles, and exit strategies. And just to illustrate that, Invert Robotics Ltd, as I said, that was the first spin out between Powerhouse and Canterbury University last year. That was the subject of a research outcome back in 2008 when Professor Jiaxi Chen came to Powerhouse and Research and Innovation with his research outcome, and he was off to China to present it at a forum. And so with about 1 week's notice, we had to evaluate whether that was going to be worth putting a provisional patent in place before he went, and then being able to leverage more off that disclosure while he was over there, whilst buying time to decide whether it was a commercial opportunity that was worth taking further. And as this one turned out, we found a commercial opportunity for it, and then that went through a PSAF, Pre-Seed Accelerator Fund project, which was really to validate the assumptions on the market entry model and the technology. And at the end of that, Powerhouse Ventures capital comes in along with an entrepreneur and turns it into a venture invest, and now it is, in 2011, an inspection company. So that's sort of a model of how it can work. A key thing with research from universities is often that the academics want to stay with the university, and so therefore we have to find an entrepreneur who can come in and take that company from the research through to its early stages of commercialisation. And in that stage it works very well. Jiaxi brings the leads to the company. He has a shareholding in the company, but he's still a full-time academic at the university. I just want to go through some of the techniques and tools that we use in evaluating some aspects of the intellectual property. And so for Invert Robotics, we had this little piece down there on the right-hand side, and this was a new wall-climbing robot. Okay, so it was a new way of getting robots to stick and climb up walls. And so we had to evaluate from there what jobs do people use robots to climb walls for. And we've got things like cleaning windows and surveillance, sending robots into minefields instead of people, those sorts of things. And so we had to try and find an application which matches that unmet market need at the top for a job to be done and the piece of IP that we've got. And the interesting thing is it's quite an iterative process, and you don't always end up with the job and the piece of IP match that you started out with as the commercial opportunity. And the job we ended up to be done was inspect my tanks. And in doing that, we're looking for a local New Zealand entry opportunity, somebody for whom that's a big enough need in New Zealand that can help bootstrap the opportunity off. And so, of course, we've got some big dairy companies in New Zealand, and they have stainless steel tanks that they have to inspect regularly for weld failures. And so we look then at, we've got our starting point IP, is that the right piece of IP to do that job? And by doing these maps, so for inspecting my tanks, you can do them manually by abseiling down into the tank, or by building a scaffolding and taking your torch and looking around the outside, or you can use robotic means. And now, of course, we've got aerial drones, we've got vacuum technologies, we've got magnetic and non-contact adhesion technology, which was the original piece of IP we started out with. And as it turns out, vacuum turned out to be the best technology for this, and it was a third pro engineering project sponsored by the new Invert Robotics, along with Professor Xiaoxi Shen supervising, that came up with a new piece of IP that's also now been patented. And that is the mechanism that's being used to deliver that first product to market. So by doing that map, we're finding trends, we're finding the best way to do the job, we can assess the strength of the IP, and we can see who the key players are and where the technology trends are going. So that's one of the first steps we do. And the second map we build is looking at the patent landscape. And what that can tell us is, again, trends. Where are people putting their effort, their resource and their money? The maturity of a technology. If you've ended up with a big platform technology and there's streams and streams of things going off it, you get an indicator of the level of maturity of the technology and who's coming in under that could be disruptive. That's how we assess our novelty and inventiveness, which you need to assess for whether it's patentable or not. And our freedom to operate. You know, if you follow your hierarchical tree down, you can see that who developed passive first. Well, are their claims something that you're going to have to license in or infringe, and in which jurisdictions? And back up, who's got the broader set of claims? Are they still in force? Have you got freedom to operate? So that's the second mapping process that we go through in determining that. And it also leads you to, you know, litigation. Who are the big competitors who are fighting, are going to cause trouble in the market? And therefore, who do you want to partner with or stay well away from? So once we have that, the third step is to look at that freedom to operate and novelty. And from a commercial aspect, we'll go through a high, low-level risk of this, and then we'll bring in patent attorneys for technical opinions if we've got something we're particularly worried about. So down the left-hand side, we've got the elements of the university IP here. You know, it's they're all using a passive technology. Repriming is when it's about to fall off the wall and it senses it and sticks itself back on. We had a sliding belt so that it could still go up the wall using a vacuum, so there was low enough friction on the belt that it looked like it was sliding up and down, instead of other vacuum technologies which basically had to put a cup that came off and went round on a belt. And tetherless, obviously if you have to have an active vacuum, you've got a pump and you've got to have a source to that, which is either battery on board or external. And so through the year you can see where the overlaps are and where the white spaces are, and you can start to assess the patentability and the novelty of your invention. And it also leads you into companies, which could be competitors, they could be customers, they could be people to align with, and also your priority dates and your jurisdictions, because if it's not patented in the country that you're going into, well, you're free to use it there. So it can help you with your market entry strategies, which countries to go with first. So that's back to the way that we assess three of those elements along the score of the strength of the freedom to operate before we negotiate. And so just to finish, a couple of aspects that we find helpful in the commercialisation of IP. We're often talking about know-how, trade secrets, undisclosed know-how, and when we're negotiating for IP with the university, both parties need to understand what that is, and in order to understand it, it has to be documented. So the more frequently that it's documented and securely documented, the faster those decisions can be made. And preventing leakage by understanding what's potentially valuable know-how and making sure that all participants in projects, we've had some projects that have had people from maybe 8 to 10 different departments involved, and just making sure that everyone is aware of that it's potentially valuable know-how and what you can and can't talk about. And sometimes with some of our startup companies will have developing disclosure policies, and as each thing goes to a patent or something, you can be free to talk about it, and it makes people in the company and associated with it more comfortable about to what level they can disclose. And finally, we want to make sure we can leverage that disclosure when it does happen, that publication of a thesis or a research paper or presenting at a symposium. You want to leverage that to maximum effect by having as much advance notice as possible, because that's how you can build reputation, get industry contacts, and make more of it. So the key things there: capture it by secure documentation, maintain a register of who's been involved with the IP, and leverage disclosures. And that's it.